In the autumn of 1943, as the Allies clawed their way up the boot of Italy and plotted the invasion of Fortress Europe, a quiet crisis gnawed at the heart of American strategy. Paratroopers, the airborne spearhead of the U.S. Army, were designed to drop behind enemy lines, seize bridges, disrupt supply routes, and sow chaos before the main force could link up. But these men, these ghosts in the machine of war, carried a fatal flaw. They were light. Too light. Rifles? Grenades, mortars, portable, yes, but impotent against the concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and armored half-tracks that dotted the German defenses. The bazooka, that vaunted shoulder-fired rocket launcher, could punch through thin plate at 200 yards, but it faltered against heavier fortifications. And heavier guns? Forget it. The 75mm pack howitzer, the Army's darling for infantry support, weighed 1,000 pounds disassembled. Paratroopers couldn't lug that from the sky. They needed artillery that fit in a rucksack, artillery that a single man or a crew of 3 could shoulder and fire from a foxhole. The brass at the Pentagon knew this. Reports flooded in from Sicily, airborne units pinned down, bleeding out because they couldn't crack the enemy's shell. "We need portable fire," the field dispatches read, "something to outrange the Kraut's 88s without anchoring us to the earth." Millions were funneled into the Ordnance Department. Blueprints for recoilless designs cribbed from captured German prototypes, scaled-down howitzers towed by jeeps, even experimental railguns that promised the moon but delivered rust. Safety was the gospel. Recoil had to be tamed, blasts contained, crews protected. War was chaos enough. Weapons couldn't add to it. Enter Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. A sprawling expanse of mud and munitions where the air hung heavy with the tang of cordite and machine oil. Here, amid the clapboard labs and frost-rime test ranges, engineers wrestled with the alchemy of steel and powder. It was a place of precise madness, telescopes tracking shell arcs, seismographs measuring ground shake, slide rules etching the boundary between boom and catastrophe. And in one dimly lit workshop, hunched over a scarred drafting table, sat Edward Kroger. 34 years old, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a nose sharpened by too many late nights. Kroger wasn't the firebrand type, no booming speeches or defiant stares. He was precise, methodical, the kind of man who could recite pi to 20 digits while recalibrating a breach mechanism. A graduate of MIT's class of 32, he'd traded the ivory towers of academia for the green machine after Pearl Harbor. Not out of blind patriotism, but a colder calculus. If the world's on fire, build something that doesn't burn. Kroger's office was a reliquary of rejects, half-assembled bazooka tubes, crumpled schematics for a super mortar that had imploded on its third test. But his eyes, sharp behind the glass, fixed on a single yellowed blueprint. It depicted a tube, unremarkable at first glance. 57mm bore, 7 feet long, lightweight alloy barrel. But the back end yawned open like a dragon's maw, frilled with venturi nozzles. No muzzle brake, no recoil spring, just a deliberate betrayal of physics. Vent the blast backward through the gunner's position. The recoilless rifle. The idea wasn't new. Carl Gustav patents from the 1920s, British whispers of Bernie guns that huffed gas like a steam engine. But Kroger's twist was audacious, born from letters he'd read in the dead of night. Letters from airborne sergeants, smudged with foxhole mud. Dropped in hot, sir. Krauts in bunkers 300 yards out. Bazooka bounces off. Mortar too slow to set up. We're meat. Kroger's jaw tightened at those words. He'd lost a cousin to a similar ambush in North Africa. Not to enemy fire, but to the lack of it. If the rule kills the soldier, break the rule, he'd mutter to himself, pencil scratching furiously. The principle was simple, devilishly so. Equal and opposite reaction, Newton's third law flipped on its head. Fire a shell forward at 1,200 feet per second, vent an equal mass of propellant gas backward at the same velocity. No net recoil. A man could brace it on his shoulder, fire from a hedgerow, and live to reload. But the catch, the fatal catch, was the backblast. That vented fury, a 4,000-degree inferno of flame and shards, roaring out at Mach speeds. It would cook the gunner, blind his spotter, turn the crew into ash. Safety protocols screamed no. Ordnance manuals forbade it. Crew endangerment, the red stamps read, unacceptable risk. Kroger's partner, William Musser, leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, his calm demeanor a counterweight to Kroger's quiet storm. Musser, a decade older, with the steady hands of a watchmaker and a mustache that hid his dry wit, had been Kroger's anchor since their days at the Springfield Armory. "Ed," he'd say, voice low as the hum of a lathe, "you're not just bucking recoil, you're bucking the Army." Kroger didn't look up. "The Army's recoil is worse, Bill. It's got us firing blanks while boys drop from the sky." The workshop thrummed with illicit energy. Stolen hours after curfew, parts scavenged from scrap bins, aluminum forgings meant for aircraft struts, black powder mixes pilfered from the howitzer line. Kroger and Musser machined the prototype in secrecy, dubbing it the T-15. A skeletal frame, tripod collapsible to backpack size, rounds loaded like shotgun shells, but packing high-explosive warheads that could crater a bunker at 400 yards. The math checked out on paper. Pressure balanced, velocity matched. But paper didn't bleed. Word leaked, as it does in places like Aberdeen. Colonel James Harrison, the artillery division's gatekeeper, a stern West Pointer with a ledger for a soul, summoned them to his office. The room smelled of oiled leather and stale tobacco, walls lined with framed citations for proven designs. The M1 howitzer, the 105mm beast that had saved lives by not killing its crews. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, his voice a gravelly indictment, "this contraption of yours, venting blasts through the fire, it's not innovation, Kroger. It's execution. One misfire and you've got a self-inflicted court-martial. The brass wants safe. Predictable. Not some suicide tube." Kroger met his gaze, unflinching. "Safe got us the Maginot Line, Colonel. Paratroopers aren't building fortifications. They're dying in them. This gives them a punch without the weight." Harrison's laugh was a bark. "And if it cooks a squad? You think Eisenhower's jumping on that?" He slid the blueprint back across the desk, stamped rejected. "Scrap it, or I'll scrap your clearances." But Kroger didn't scrap it. He hid it. Under tarps in a corner shed, amid the ghosts of failed prototypes. Musser stood watch while Kroger tweaked the vents, baffles to direct the flame upward, ceramic liners to shield the breach. They tested miniatures in the dead of night. Pop guns with .22 powder, measuring backblast with soot-blackened mannequins. The air filled with the acrid bite of burnt propellant, the metallic whump echoing off the Proving Ground's berms. By December, the T-15 was ready, or as ready as Defiance gets. A skeletal beast. 35 pounds unloaded, its barrel gleaming dully under the winter moon. The test range lay silent, frost glazing the impact pits. A target bunker, 300 yards out. Concrete slab, simulated machine gun slit, rigged with pressure sensors. A skeleton crew, Kroger at the controls, Musser on the chronograph, a nervous corporal from the range safety detail clutching his whistle. "This is madness," the corporal muttered, breath fogging the air. "One shot and we're all flash-fried." Kroger knelt behind the tripod, the T-15's cold weight pressing into his shoulder. The round slipped home with a metallic clink, high explosive, fin-stabilized, nose fused for impact. His finger hovered over the trigger, a simple lever etched with warnings he'd ignored. The rule kills the soldier. Part steady, he squeezed. The world erupted, not forward, but everywhere. A thunderclap split the night, the muzzle flash a brief sun igniting frost crystals into steam. But no kick, no wrenching shove to unseat the gunner. Instead, a hurricane howled backward, flame lancing skyward in a 20-foot geyser. The ground scorched black in a fan pattern, air shimmering with heat. The corporal dove flat, cursing. Musser flinched, then steadied his scope. Silence fell, heavy as fallout. Kroger rose, ears ringing, the scent of scorched earth and ozone thick in his nostrils. Downrange through the haze, the bunker was gone, shattered, smoking, its sensors registering a perfect strike. Velocity, 1,180 feet per second. No barrel warp, no breach failure. The corporal lifted his head, face pale. Holy Christ, it worked. Musser lowered the chronograph, a rare grin cracking his reserve. Balance to the ounce, Ed. Newton's weeping somewhere. Kroger didn't smile. He stared at the smoldering vents, the faint char on his sleeve where the backwash had kissed him. Close, he thought, but alive. The Army would call it unsafe, reckless. But in that frost-bitten instant, as the echo of the shot faded into the Maryland night, one truth crystallized. This wasn't just a weapon. It was permission. When the smoke cleared, they realized he hadn't broken physics. He'd just outsmarted it. To understand the shot that shattered silence on that Christmas Eve, you have to rewind the reel. Back to the summer of 1942, when the U.S. Army was still shaking off the rust of isolationism, and Edward Kroger was just another engineer lost in the machine. Aberdeen wasn't his first crucible. No, the fire that forged the T-15 started months earlier, in the humid bowels of the Springfield Armory, Massachusetts, a sprawling red brick beast where rifles were born and dreams were stamped flat. Kroger had arrived there in April, fresh from a crash course in munitions at Watertown Arsenal. The war in Europe was a newsreel nightmare. Stalingrad's meat grinder, Tobruk's sieges, the Dip Raid's bloodbath, where Canadian commandos were chewed up on pebble beaches because their anti-tank guns couldn't keep pace. But for the airborne divisions, those elite pathfinders training to leap into the abyss, the problem was personal. Kroger saw it in the specs. The M1A1 bazooka, a 5-foot tube of promise, but its rocket fizzled at 150 yards against sloped armor. The 60mm mortar, portable, but its popgun shells barely dented pillboxes. And God help you if you tried humping a real cannon from a C-47. "We need fire that flies with us," Kroger scribbled in his notebook margins during briefings. Not towed, not crated, carried. The brass nodded, then pivoted to proven paths, scaling down the French 75mm, aping the German Panzerfaust with its one-shot disposability. Safety reigned supreme. Every design had to pass the crew survivability gauntlet: recoil absorbers thicker than a tank's hide, blast shields that added pounds no paratrooper could spare. Colonel Harrison's predecessor, a grizzled relic from the Great War, preached it like scripture. A weapon that kills its master is no weapon at all. Kroger chafed at the sermon. In the armory's drafting room, amid the tick-tick of typewriters and the rasp of T-squares on vellum, he met William Musser. Bill was the yin to Ed's yang. 42, broad-shouldered from his days as a machinist in Detroit's auto plants, with calluses that told stories of precision over power. Musser had enlisted after his brother went down with the USS Arizona. Now he machined tolerances to 1/1000th of an inch, turning raw steel into the heartbeat of Garands. Their first collaboration was mundane, a recoil buffer for the M1919 machine gun, but sparks flew over coffee breaks. "Ever think about ditching the kick altogether?" Musser asked one muggy afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow as they poured over a misfiring howitzer breach. The air was thick, with the oily tang of cutting fluid and the faint, ever-present whiff of gunpowder from the test sheds. Kroger paused, spectacles fogging slightly. "Newton says you can't. Action, reaction, it's baked in." But his mind raced, tracing lines from undergraduate physics to a dog-eared copy of the principles of projectiles he'd smuggled from MIT. What if you redirected the reaction? Vent it like a rocket's exhaust, equal mass for equal force. The backblast would be hell, scorching, deafening, but contained, directed, it could be managed. A gun that breathed fire backward, leaving the shooter steady as stone. Musser's eyes lit, the mustache twitching in what passed for his smile. "Hell, Ed, that's not engineering. That's poetry. But the suits'll crucify you. Crew hazard, they'll say. Litigation waiting to happen." They started small, forbidden sketches in the margins of official logs. After hours, in a corner of the machine shop where the lathes hummed like dormant beasts, they'd mock up miniatures. Brass tubes no longer than a cigarette, loaded with black powder and wadded shot. The first test was a farce, a f of smoke and a spray of lead BBs that singed Musser's sleeve. "Too much blowback," Kroger muttered, jotting velocities on a scrap of blueprint. 4,200 degrees. Gotta baffle it. Word spread like shrapnel. By August, their hobby project caught the eye of the review board. Harrison, transferred from Springfield to oversee innovative artillery, called them in. His office was a fortress of filing cabinets, each drawer a tomb for radical ideas. He loomed over the table, a blueprint of their prototype unrolled like a death warrant. "Mr. Kroger, Mr. Musser, this vented nonsense. It's not just unorthodox, it's irresponsible." Harrison's finger stabbed the drawing, tracing the open breach. Propellant gas at supersonic speeds right through the loader's face. One fracture in the vents, and you've got a fragmentation grenade in the firer's lap. "We're at war, gentlemen, not playing with fireworks. The Army wants reliability, doctrine, not some Rube Goldberg suicide pact." Kroger stood rigid, the room's stale air pressing like a vice. "Doctrine got the Brits slaughtered at Arnhem. Sir, planning for yesterday's fight. Paratroopers drop light, fight heavy. This gives them 400 yards of punch without a ton of steel. The math holds. Momentum conserved, no net force. It's not suicide, it's symmetry. Harrison's laugh echoed off the walls, dry as spent casings. Symmetry? Spare me the classroom. I've seen symmetrical designs bury good men under recoil fractures. No funding, no range time. Shut it down, or I'll shut you down. He rolled the blueprint tight, tossing it into a waste bin like yesterday's ration. But Kroger didn't shut it down. Defiance isn't a roar. It's the quiet click of a lathe restarting in the dark. That night, under a moonless sky heavy with thunderheads, he and Musser smuggled the prototype out in a tool crate labeled faulty dies. They drove south to a forgotten quarry on the armory's fringe, cratered limestone walls that swallowed sound like secrets. Flashlights bound with red tape cast bloody glows on the rock faces. The air hummed with crickets and the distant thump of night training jumps from Fort Devens. "This is court-martial territory, Ed," Musser whispered, heaving the tube onto a makeshift rest of sandbags. His hands, steady as always, packed the charge, 200 grains of smokeless powder, a wooden sabot to seal the breech. The target, a rusted oil drum 100 yards out, stuffed with rags to mimic flesh. Kroger sighted down the barrel, the cold metal grounding him. The rule kills the soldier. Ready? As a virgin at a barn dance. The trigger fell. A crack like lightning in a bottle, muzzle bloomed forward, a geyser of orange aft, scorching the quarry floor and a fan of fused sand. No shove. The drum leaped shredded, raining black ichor, but the backwash, it clawed. Kroger's cheek burned, a stripe of raw pink. Musser coughed, eyes watering from the gas plume. "Christ, that's hot," Musser rasped, fanning the air. The scent lingered, acrid cordite laced with brimstone. The quarry's dust turned to glass. Kroger touched his face, wincing. "Hot but survivable. Add deflectors, angle the vents 45 degrees. It'll roar up, not in." They iterated there, in the shadows, filing baffles by headlamp, testing till dawn pinked the horizon. Each shot a gamble, barrel swell from pressure, vent cracks spidering like veins. But the logic held, unyielding as alloy, for every ounce forward, an ounce back. No net hell. By fall, whispers reached Aberdeen. Kroger requested transfer, seeking advanced ballistics. And Musser followed, crate of salvage in tow. The Proving Ground welcomed them with open arms and closed doors. Officially, they toiled on the T-19, a safe recoilless, cribbed from German Scheisswaffen, with massive frusto-conical nozzles that vented sideways, adding 50 pounds no airborne man could carry. Harrison oversaw it personally, his reports glowing with praise for controlled risk. But in the shed's gloom, the T-15 lived. Kroger scavenged, titanium shavings from the jet lab for lightweight baffles, ceramic insulators from the radar shop to line the breach. Musser machined nights away, the lathes whine a lullaby of rebellion. They pored over stolen intel, British trials of the Payat projector, Swedish Carl Gustaf mock-ups, adapting, refining. "It's not about the gun," Kroger said one frost-nipped evening as they calibrated a pressure gauge, its needle dancing like a heartbeat. "It's about the man behind it. Safety's a luxury when you're 10,000 feet up and the chute's your only brake." Musser nodded, wiping emery dust from his hands. "And when the Krauts are 200 yards out with an MG-42? Luxury's the first to die." The Army's fear was a living thing, inspections that lingered too long, memos accidentally rerouting their supplies. Harrison cornered Kroger in the mess hall, fork midway to mouth. "Heard you've got a pet project, Ed, tinkering with ghosts. Drop it. The T-19's your future, proven, fundable. This other, it's poison." Kroger set his tray down, voice even. "Poison cures too, Colonel, when the snake's already biting." Harrison's eyes narrowed, the fluorescent buzz overhead underscoring the standoff. "Watch your metaphors, or your career." But careers were expendable, lives weren't. As winter clamped down, the T-15 took shape. Vents, hooded like a cobra's hood, rounds finned for spin stabilization, the hull collapsing to 28 inches for a rucksack strap. They ran simulations in stolen hours. Ballistic tables crunched on a borrowed Marchant calculator, the clack-clack echoing their resolve. The backblast? Tamed to a manageable dragon's breath. 1,800 foot-pounds of thrust upward, enough to singe hair but not flesh, if you stood clear. By December, the prototype whispered readiness, and on the 24th, under that iron sky, they pulled the trigger on history. He wasn't fighting the enemy, he was fighting the idea of safety itself. The shot on Christmas Eve wasn't a victory. It was a declaration of war. Not against the Axis, but against the invisible empire that governed Aberdeen. The doctrine of safety. Colonel James Harrison moved like a man who'd swallowed a bayonet. Straight, unyielding, his reports now laced with the T-15's name like a curse. Uncontrolled variables, he typed into memos that flew to the Pentagon. Potential for catastrophic crew injury. Recommend immediate cessation. Funding for the vented abomination, as he called it in private, dried up faster than a misfired round. Supplies vanished. Primer cord rerouted to the howitzer line, alloy stock misplaced in inventory audits. Kroger and Musser's shed became a bunker, lit by contraband lanterns, the air thick with the metallic tang of solder and suspicion. But the T-15 demanded trials. Not the sanitized demos of the Proving Grounds parade, but real gauntlets, endurance tests that would expose every fracture, every whisper of failure. Kroger petitioned for range time under the guise of auxiliary T-19 support, slipping the request through a sympathetic clerk who'd lost a nephew to a pinned-down airborne squad in Anzio. Approval came grudgingly. 3 slots, dawn patrols on the outer ranges, observers mandatory. Harrison chose the watchers himself, his hand-picked skeptics, clipboards at the ready to log every scorch mark as evidence of folly. The first trial dawned gray and bitter, January 15th. Wind howled off the Chesapeake like a banshee, flinging sleet that stung like birdshot. The T-15, shrouded in oilcloth till the last moment, stood tripod-mounted on a rise overlooking the impact zone, a mock bunker complex, 400 yards out, reinforced with steel plate and sandbags to simulate a Rhine pillbox. Kroger's hands, chapped raw from cold and machining, locked the sights. Musser flanked him, chronograph humming, a thermos of black coffee steaming between them. The observer detail huddled 50 yards back, 2 lieutenants in greatcoats, faces pinched with doubt, and Harrison himself, binoculars glued to his eyes like a predator scenting blood. Range clear, the safety officer barked over the gale. Firing on command. Kroger chambered the round, a high-explosive squash head, designed to pancake on impact and burrow like a drill. The breech snicked shut, vents aligned to kiss the sky. The rule kills the soldier. He braced, shoulder to stock, the tube's weight a familiar anchor. T-15 round 1, HE, 400 yards, firing. The trigger bit, a crump that rolled like thunder trapped in a barrel. Forward, a lance of fire, the shell arcing true, blooming orange on the bunker's face. Concrete spider-webbed, plate buckled inward with a distant wang. Backward, the dragon woke. Flame jetted upward in a 25-foot plume, sleet vaporizing to mist, the ground behind etched black in a perfect fan. Heat washed over Kroger like a forge breath, singeing his collar but no more. No whip of recoil to bruise ribs or snap a mount. The lieutenants flinched, one stumbling back as embers danced on the wind. Musser called times. Velocity 1,210 FPS. Impact dead center. No barrel deviation. Harrison lowered his glasses, face a mask of frost-laced granite. He approached slow, boots crunching ice, circling the T-15 like a coroner at autopsy. His gloved hand traced the vents, warm still, residue flaking like ash. Impressive parlor trick, Kroger. But that's one shot. What about sustained fire? Overheat those vents and you've got a blowout. Crew cooked mid-burst. His breath hung in accusation. And that backwash. Stand a man wrong and he's blind from flash or shredded by fragments. This isn't a toy, it's a liability. Kroger wiped sweat from his brow, the chill mocking the burn. Liability's dying in a ditch with a jammed bazooka, Colonel. We've baffles, ceramic-lined, tested to 5,000 degrees. Stand clear of the cone, and it's safer than a Garan's muzzle. Harrison snorted, jotting notes that bled ink in the wet. Safer? Tell that to the review board. You're on a leash now. Supervised loads, no live warheads without my sign-off. He turned on his heel, the detail trailing like scolded hounds, but not before Kroger caught the flicker in one lieutenant's eye. Not dismissal, but hunger. The sabotage started subtle. A shadow play in the bureaucracy's theater. Next trial, February 3rd. Powder charges swapped for underpowered batches. The T-15's shells lobbing short like drunks at a urinal. Musser caught it mid-magazine. Grains too coarse, nitro content diluted. Tampered, he growled, dumping the batch into a waste barrel, the acrid reek rising like a warning. Kroger's jaw set. He sourced black market propellant from a sympathetic loader in the small arms annex, paying in bootleg cigarettes and silence. Then the inspections. Unannounced raids at 400. Harrison's men combing the shed for contraband. Blueprints shredded in accidental shredder jams. Event prototypes smashed under a dropped crate. Clumsiness that reeked of orders. Kroger confronted Harrison in the officers' club, the air hazy with pipe smoke and resentment, a half-empty scotch sweating on the bar. This ends, Colonel. Sabotage won't bury it. The T-15 works, math doesn't lie. Harrison swirled his glass, ice clinking like loading gates. Math? Try politics, son. The T-19's got senators in its pocket, Westinghouse tooling the line, jobs in 3 states. Your pipe dream? It's a widowmaker waiting for a headline. Yank engineers fry own men in reckless test. You think the public stomachs that while we're rationing tires? His voice dropped, confiding venom. Drop it, Ed. Join the winners. Or watch your genius rust in a crate. Kroger leaned in, the club's murmur fading to a hum. Winners? The T-19 weighs 62 pounds. Paratroopers will ditch it before the DZ. Safety's your god, but it's chaining us to yesterday. This war's won by the light and lethal, not the armored ox. Harrison's smile was a slit. Then prove it. Head to head. T-15 versus T-19, full eval next month. Win and maybe you get a pat on the head. Lose. Well, heroes don't rise from scrap heaps. The showdown was set. March 10th, the main range under a sky bruised purple with Springs tees. Spectators swelled. Ordnance brass from D.C., airborne reps from Fort Bragg, even a wire service photographer sniffing for scoops. The T-19 loomed first, a brute of a gun, 57 millimeters like the T-15 but bloated with safety's excess. Side venting nozzles like elephant ears, hydraulic dampers coiling the barrel like a serpent, weight tipping scales at 68 pounds assembled. Its crew, 5 men to manhandle it, shields deployed like a phalanx. Harrison presided, chest puffed under his ribbons. The test protocol was merciless. 5-round strings at escalating ranges, 200, 300, 400 yards, against layered targets, sandbag revetments, then plate-armored bunkers, finally a moving jeep simulating a half-track. Accuracy, reliability, crew safety, all scored on clipboards that might as well have been gavels. T-19 fired first. A boom like Judgment Day, recoil tamed to a shudder by its springs, shell slamming home at 200 yards. Crew intact behind shields. No backwash to haunt them. Applause rippled, solid, predictable. But at 300 the weight told. Crew grunted shifting it, reloads fumbling in the mud. A vent nozzle fouled on round 4, spewing gas sideways. One loader coughed, eyes streaming. Harrison waved it off. Anomaly. Acceptable. Then the T-15. Kroger's crew, just 3. Him on trigger, Musser loading, a volunteer private spotting. The tube snapped open like a fowler's brake, round home in seconds. T-15, string 1, 200 yards. Crack, clean, the backblast a controlled inferno upward, singeing grass but sparing flesh. Hit, dead center, revetment cratered, reload, 8 seconds. The private grinned, unbidden, like a goddamn Garand with balls. 300 yards, wind sheared, but the shell bit true, plate dented deep. Backwash licked higher, a faint whoosh like a blowtorch. Kroger's sleeve blackened, but his aim held. Musser called impacts, voice steady over the whine of the chronograph. 400, the crux. The T-19 had labored here, its bulk bogging in soft earth, a misfeed costing a point. Kroger sighted the jeep, 50-mile-per-hour weave, dust plume marking its dodge. The air hummed with tension. Sleet from weeks past turned to mud that sucked at boots. Harrison's binoculars bored in. Last round, Kroger murmured. Break the rule. The trigger dropped. A thud muffled by baffles, shells streaking low and fast. Forward bloom met the jeep's flank in a crunch of fireball and screeching metal, the mock half-track flipping end over end into the berm. Backward, the plume peaked, a brief aurora of orange against the clouds, heat mirage warping the air. Silence crashed down, broken only by the jeep's dying sputter. Scores tallied under pavilion tents, coffee steaming as arguments brewed. T-19, 87%, reliable but ponderous. T-15, 94%, lethal, light with manageable hazards in the margins. The airborne reps leaned in, whispering of rucksack trials. But Harrison's pen hovered, then struck, deductions for unproven long-term blast effects. Tie, effectively. Further evaluation required, he announced, voice flat as a stamped rejection. T-19 advances to production. T-15 holds for review. Kroger packed the tube in the mud-slick dusk, Musser clapping his shoulder. The photographer snapped a shot, Kroger's face half-shadow, eyes like flint. Sabotage or no, the gauntlet was run. And in the echo of those explosions, amid the cordite ghosts and the doctrine's snarl, one equation endured. Innovation wasn't permissioned. It was seized. Every test, every explosion, was proof that progress doesn't ask for permission. By the spring of 1945, the T-15 had shed its prototype skin, refined in the fires of Aberdeen's trials. Vents streamlined, rounds stabilized, weight shaved to 52 pounds loaded, the beast emerged as the M18 57mm recoilless rifle. Not a wholesale victory, but a grudging concession. Colonel Harrison's blockade cracked under the weight of battlefield telegrams. Anzio's stalemate, the bulge's frozen hell, where airborne units bled for lack of punch. Major General Bud Miley, the 17th Airborne's iron-willed commander, a paratroopers paratrooper, with jump boots scarred from Sicily to Normandy, demanded it. "Give me fire that falls with my boys," he'd wired the Ordnance chief, voice of thunder over the teletype, "or watch them hang from gliders like piñatas." The M18, shipped in crates stamped experimental, crew trained only, 200 units rushed to Aldermaston, England's staging fields. Training was baptism by blaze, mock jumps over the downs where squads learned the ritual, clear the backblast cone, angle the vents skyward, fire from prone in hedgerows. The roar scarred psyches, that backward hurricane, flame-licking 30 feet, the whump that rattled teeth. But it sang to them. 400 yards of reach, bunker-busting warheads, reload in 10 seconds. No more hunkering under mortar pop-pop while 88s zeroed in. This was artillery unchained, a devil's bargain where danger bought deliverance. Enter Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, 24, a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco's Chinatown, whose father had sweated rivets on Liberty ships. Chen wasn't the hero type, no silver tongue or movie star jaw. He was wiry, eyes sharp as shrapnel, with a laugh that cut tension like a bayonet. Drafted in 42, he'd volunteered for the 513th Parachute Infantry Regiment after Pearl Harbor's echo hit home. "Fight like hell, so the folks back home don't have to," he'd told his ma in a letter, words she'd folded into her Bible. Now, in the 17th's final briefings, he humped the M18 like a prodigal son, barrel lashed to his reserved chute, rounds in bandoliers that clinked like loose change. Miley pinned the op on a wall-sized map, Rhine bridges marked in red grease, Remagen intact, but the east bank a hornet's nest of pillboxes, flak towers, and SS holdouts. Varsity's gamble, drop 1,300 planes worth of hell on the Dyersforter forest, seize the high ground, pave Ike's road to Berlin. "The Krauts expect us," Miley growled to his jumpmasters, cigar ash dusting his jump wings. "They've got the 88 zeroed, MGs nested in concrete, but we've got something they don't, Kroger's folly." He tapped the M18 schematic, a ghost of a smile. "Light as sin, mean as the devil. Use it right, boys, and you'll crack their shell before breakfast." Chen's stick drew the hot diese, Hamminkeln, a quilt of flooded fields and skeletal woods, 300 yards from a fortified farm complex. Bunkers ringed with razor wire, machine guns and slit-eyed casemates. His crew, Private Eddie Ruiz, a Brooklyn kid with trigger fingers like springs on loader, Corporal Lena Voss, a whack transplant to signals who'd retrained as spotter, her steady gaze belying the tremor in her voice. They drilled the M18 till blisters formed. Clink of the breech, thud of the round seating, the ritual shout, clear backblast. Before the world ignited. 0 hour, 0950, March 24th. The C-47 bucked through flak bursts, black puffs blooming like bruises in the blue. Chen hung by the door, wind howling through his May West, the M18's weight a cold comfort against his chest. "This is it," Ruiz yelled over the engines, face green-tinged. "Jump or burn." Chen clapped his shoulder, the stick counting down, 10, 9, green light. The rush, freefall twist, chute balloon with a jolt that bit straps. Below, tracers stitched the sky, gliders crumpling like tinfoil. Chen hit mud thigh deep, roll, unclip, splash, the world a cacophony of snaps and screams. Rally point, a copse of splintered pines, 200 yards from the DZ's edge. Chen's platoon coalesced in fragments, half strength, the LT gut shot in the silk. German fire chattered from the farm. MG-42s, that electric buzzsaw him, pinning them in the muck. Bullets thwipped overhead, splintering bark, turning leaves to confetti. Voss dragged in, radio smashed, blood streaking her cheek from a shrapnel kiss. Bunkers at 11 o'clock, Sarge. 3 nests, concrete, 350 yards. They're dug like ticks. Chen low crawled to the M18, mud sucking at his gloves, the tube's vents clogged with Rhine silt. Ruiz, clear a lane. Voss, spot. Heart hammering, he wiped the bore, the metallic zing of proximity fuses echoing his pulse. The air reeked, cordite sharp, earth churned to slurry, the faint copper of blood from a fallen glider pilot crumpled nearby. Kroger's folly. The name flickered like a prayer. Back at Aldermaston, the engineer himself had demoed it. One shot, that impossible balance, flame-venting, harmless but fierce. "It's not safe," Kroger had said, voice steady as a vernier. "But it's alive." The platoon hugged the deck, Garands popping futile snaps at slits too far, too armored. A Kraut counterprobe, half-track rumbling from the tree line, its 20mm spitting fire, forced the call. Chen keyed the field phone, Miley's forward CP a whisper away. "Red Falcon, this is Jumpin' Jack. M18 green, request fire window." Static crackled, then Miley's bark. "Jack Falcon. Window's yours. Crack 'em, Sergeant. Make Kroger proud." Chen sighted the lead bunker, a squat toad of ferroconcrete, embrasure winking death at 380 yards. Beyond, the half-tracks chewed mud, infantry spilling like ants. Backblast clear. Ruiz sprawled left, Voss right, the cone etched in their minds, a 45-degree kill zone of no man's land. Chen braced prone, elbows sunk in mire, the M18's bipod biting earth. The round-shaped charge, copper liner to melt armor like butter, slid home with Ruiz's grunt. Clink. Breech locked. Wind gusted, carrying the half-track's growl, a private sob nearby. "On my mark," Chen breathed. "Break the rule." The world narrowed to the trigger's curve, finger whitening. Fire. The M18 answered, not with recoil's shove, but a void's birth. Crump. Muzzle spat a comet's tail, the shell vanishing in a flat arc. Then the void exhaled, backward, a serpent of flame uncoiled upward, 40 feet of inferno that scorched pine needles to ash, the heat a slap that peeled paint from Chen's helmet. No kick, just nothing, the tube steady as if mocking Newton. The air whooshed, a blowtorch gale that singed Ruiz's pack, Voss shielding her face with mud-smeared sleeve. Ears rang, vision starred, but they lived. Dragon's breath, tamed. Downrange, 1.2 seconds to impact. The shell struck low, kissing concrete with a whump muffled by distance. Then boom, a flower of dust and debris, the bunker erupting in a cough of rebar and flame. The embrasure vanished, swallowed. Screams cut short, the MG-42's chatter silenced mid-burst. Shrapnel whistled back, pocking trees, but the nest was gutted, slit collapsed, crew vaporized in their steel womb. The half-track slewed, turret swiveling blind. Cheers ripped from the platoon, hoarse, disbelieving, as Chen reloaded, hands a blur. Reloading, second target. The M18 cycled hot, vents glowing cherry red, the scent of scorched alloy mingling with the battlefield's rot. Second round, the half-track's engine block, 320 yards. Fire. Again the void, forward strike blooming orange, treads shearing like foil, backward plume lancing sky, igniting a low branch that crackled like applause. The vehicle slewed into a ditch belching black smoke, its crew bailing into grazing Garand fire. Voss whooped, grabbing Chen's arm. "Direct hit, Sarge, they're breaking." Indeed, the farm's defenders faltered, shadows peeling from slits, counterfire sporadic. One more, the command bunker, 410 yards, a reinforced hulk commanding the road. Chen adjusted for drop, windage a ghost in his eye. The M18 thrummed under his cheek, pressure building like a held breath. For the folks back home, trigger fall, crack, the balance holding, backblast a familiar fiend now, heat harmless in its fury. Impact, a thunderclap that shook the earth, concrete fracturing like eggshell, the roof caving in a roar of dust. Silence bloomed in its wake, no more interlocking fire, just the half-track's pyre and the platoon's ragged advance. They surged forward, M18 shouldered like a torch, Ruiz covering flanks. Miley's voice crackled later in the CP. "Jack, Falcon, that's how you jump." M18 gold, relay to Kroger, his baby's a bunker buster. Word raced up the chain, first combat use, 3 nests down, 0 blue casualties from the gun itself. Airborne infantry, once fragile scouts, now strode with artillery's thunder. Chen collapsed against a shattered wall at dusk, the Rhine's floodwaters lapping nearby, the M18 cooling beside him like a faithful hound. His hands trembled, not fear, but the echo of that void. Recoil's absence, safety's defiance. Theory met chaos, he thought, and won. Back at Aberdeen, 4,000 miles west, Kroger read the dispatch under a desk lamp, Musser peering over his shoulder. The workshop smelled of oil and old Triumphs, the T-19's ghost crates gathering dust. Harrison had conceded weeks prior, production lines humming for 10,000 M18s. But this, Varsity's after action, Chen's crew etched in ink, hit like vindication's shot. It worked, Musser murmured, voice thick. Under fire. Their fire. Kroger nodded, folding the paper precise, the rule broken, soldiers breathing. In the roar of battle, one engineer's insanity became an army's salvation. Operation Varsity was no isolated thunderclap. It was the M18's baptism, a proof of principle, etched in the Rhine's blood-soaked mud. By April 1945, as the 17th Airborne pushed east toward the Elbe, Staff Sergeant Mike Chen's crew became legend in hushed foxhole tales. The Dragon Slayers, their recoilless roar cracking the Wehrmacht's spine when Garons whispered futile. Chen himself earned a Silver Star for that first barrage, citation reading, "Extraordinary valor in employing experimental ordnance under withering fire." But he wore it like an afterthought, the medal tucked into his jump jacket beside a faded photo of his folks, smiling outside a noodle shop in Frisco. The M18 spread like contraband gospel. From Hamilton's fields to the Harz Mountains' pine-choked passes, airborne squads shouldered it as equalizer. In the Ruhrpockets factory inferno, the 82nd's Pathfinders used it to gut flak towers from 500 yards, shells whispering through rain to detonate deep, collapsing steel skeletons that had shredded B-17s for years. Casualty reports shifted. Pre-M18, bunker assaults chewed platoons at 30% losses. Post, it halved. The backblast's discipline, clear the cone, angled events, turning hazard into him. General Miley, cigar clamped in victory's grin, wired ordnance. Kroger's gamble paid dividends. Tell him his dragon breathes fire without biting back. But Europe was only half the ledger. As the Rhine faded to memory, the M18 crossed oceans, crated in the holds of Liberty ships bound for the Pacific's cauldron. Okinawa, April 1945, the Iron Typhoon, where 82,000 Marines clawed at 100,000 Japanese, dug into coral ridges and reverse-slope caves. The island was a butcher's block. Shuri Line's honeycombed heights where Nambu machine guns nested in tombs and 320mm spigot mortars lobbed death from unseen layers. Amphibious doctrine called for naval barrage, but mud and monsoons turned beaches to quagmires. Infantry needed fire that humped the ridge with them. The 77th Infantry Division's 306th Regiment drew the short straw. Sugarloaf Hill, a 300-foot pimple of razorback and tombstone, defended by fanatics who'd sworn banzai to the last grenade. Captain Elias Eli Ramirez, a Tex-Mex Mustang risen from the ranks, inherited a demo M18 lot, 50 rifles, rushed from stateside lines with a terse manual. Vents up, back clear, fire true. His company, the Devil Dogs, had lost 40% to knee mortars on the approach. Now pinned at the hill's base, they bled under enfilade from camouflaged slits 250 yards upslope. Private First Class Tommy Hale, a lanky kid from the Ozarks with banjo-calloused fingers, drew loader duty. No paratrooper he'd shipped over from stateside, but the M18 didn't discriminate. In a shell crater stinking of phosphorus and gangrene, Ramirez briefed under poncho cover, rain drumming like impatient fingers. "This ain't a bazooka, boys. It's a cannon on your back. One shot cracks concrete like eggshell, but that back end'll roast your buddy if you're sloppy. We take the hill today or we fertilize it." Hale's hands shook, chambering the first round, the clink lost in the crack of Arasaka fire. The air hung heavy, jungle rot, cordite bite, the sweet sour of unburied dead. Ramirez sighted from the crater's lip, mud caking his fatigues, the M18's bipod sunk in ooze. Backblast clear. His spotter, a wiry corpsman named Kowalski, flattened right, yelling over the din. The vents yawned upward, rain hissing to steam on hot metal from the tube's fever. Trigger pull. The void again, that Newtonian heresy. Forward, a thudding bloom, the shape charge kissing limestone with a muffled whump, then boom. A geyser of rock and screams, the slit collapsing in a cascade of coral shards. Backward, flame lanced skyward through the downpour. A 20-foot torch that boiled rain to fog, scorching Hale's sleeve to char but sparing flesh. No recoil, just the earth's faint tremor, the tube unmoved, as if the hill itself had exhaled defiance. The Japanese replied, a knee mortar plunked nearby, shrapnel snicking off the crater rim. But the nest was silenced, one less chatter in the symphony of death. Ramirez reloaded, Hale's hands steadier now, the rhythm sinking in. Load, lock, clear, fire. Second shot, a cave mouth belching grenades, 200 yards left. Fire. Impact cratered the entrance, sealing it with rubble and fire, echoes rumbling like buried thunder. The backblast whooshed harmless, igniting fronds overhead in brief pyres that lit the ridge like signal flares. Word leaped foxholes, the devil's tube, it's eating the hill. By dusk Sugarloaf fell. Not to waves of banzai, but to the M18's patient predation. 8 nests gutted, 200 yards of slope cleared, casualties held to 15. Ramirez's after action. Recoilless rifle turned infantry support into personal artillery. Backblast hazard minimal with discipline. Payoff immense. Okinawa's toll, 12,500 American dead, might have swelled without it. The M18's 300 units saving platoons from meat grinder assaults. VJ Day, September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay's surrender aboard the Missouri, brass bands and headlines proclaiming unconditional. The M18, that maverick spawn, tallied its quiet score. 5,000 produced, deployed from Bastone's snow to Iwo's ash, credited in ordnance tallies with 2,000 plus enemy fortifications reduced. Korea would call it back in 50, Vietnam's jungles in 65, evolving into the super bazooka, then the Carl Gustav's kin. But its cradle was this war, born of Kroger's shed and Chen's mud. Edward Kroger watched it all from Aberdeen's sidelines. The Proving Ground now a peacetime hum of tractors and test dummies. No parades for him, no chest of ribbons, no podium thunder. At 36 he was gaunt, spectacles etched with fine lines from schematics and short rations. The M18's production had vindicated him. Harrison, thawed by victory's wine, offered a handshake in the officers' club, voice gruff. You were right, Ed. Damn near got me drummed out pushing back. But it saved boys. Kroger nodded, the old burn on his cheek itching like a scar's memory. Wasn't about right, Colonel, was about them coming home. Musser retired first to a quiet spread in Pennsylvania, where he machined fishing lures and told the tale to grandkids over cider. Your grandpa built a gun that didn't kick back, except at the rules. Kroger lingered, consulting on Cold War curiosities, wire-guided missiles, laser rangefinders, but the fire dimmed. In 48, he penned a monograph for the Journal of Ballistics, Recoilless Principles and Crew Survivability, footnotes heavy with equations, appendices citing Chen's Silver Star dispatch. It gathered dust in archives, read by PhDs who marveled at the audacity. Vent the devil, tame the god. The cost of genius? It whispered in quiet moments. Kroger's marriage frayed under war's long shadows. His wife, a draftsman's aide, left for a man who came home nightly. Sleepless dawns he'd wander the ranges, the wind carrying ghosts of whumps and cheers. Did I break more than rules? The backblast had claimed no Americans in combat, but in trials, a loader's flash blindness, a tech's singed lung, small tolls, buried in reports. Safety's doctrine, once antagonist, now echoed his own caution. Innovation's edge cuts both ways. Yet the letters piled, from Chen, post-war in a GI Bill classroom, your tube got me through the Rhine, Sarge. Now it's getting me through equations. From Ramirez, farming chilies in Laredo. Sugarloaf still haunts, but that rifle? It was grace. By 1950, Kroger faded into obscurity. A footnote in Jane's infantry weapons, a name on a patent plaque gathering dust at the Smithsonian. He died in 72, heart giving out over a half-finished sketch for a ventless howitzer. Musser at his bedside, the two old rebels sharing a final, wry grin. No obit in the Times. Just a quiet service at Arlington, plot near the Airborne Memorial, where jump boots polish brass under eternal lights. The legacy endures, alloyed into the marrow of modern war. The M18 birthed a lineage, the 84mm Carl Gustav, shoulder-fired in Afghanistan's Wadis. The AT-4, disposable dragon in Ukraine's trenches. It redefined safe, not the absence of risk, but its calculation, the faith that a controlled inferno outshines certain death. Paratroopers, once light infantry's orphans, became wolves with fangs, portable thunder, defiance democratized. In the end, Kroger didn't seek redemption in headlines. It came in the lives unlived in ditches, the homecomings unchained by his heresy. The rule kills the soldier. He broke it, not with fury, but with the steady hand of a man who trusted equations over edicts. And in that break, he forged a bridge from desperation to dawn. He broke the rules of safety, so others could break through the limits of survival. If you believe forgotten innovations deserve their stories told, Subscribe for more untold World War II brilliance.